For those of us with a more conservative, traditional, and obviously pro-life mindset, it can be tempting to look at the modern world with something of a pessimistic, cynical glance. After all, in a purely temporal sense, things don't look great. But recently I've been drawing hope from an unexpected source. Gen Z, or Gen Z for our viewers on the other side of the Atlantic, are, it's fair to say, defying the expectations of sociologists the world over for a number of reasons. A not insignificant proportion of the generation of people born between 1997 and 2012 are surprisingly religious, surprisingly conservative, and surprisingly pro-life. And they're pretty vocal about it too. I'm William Curry, and this is Viewpoint. Before I heap praise onto a whole generation of people, I should declare that I'm a millennial, a generation perhaps best characterized as being tech-savvy, less likely to own the house we live in, and, according to the University of Cambridge, the most politically disillusioned generation in living memory. But there's something different about Gen Z. There's a commendable optimism about them and a refusal to follow in the same vein as those born before them. But this isn't just my opinion. It's backed up by data. When it comes to religion, even the mainstream media are noticing a generational shift in attitudes towards faith. In September of 2025, CNN ran a report all about why Gen Z men in particular are turning to religion. In it, they cite political scientist Ryan Burge. In Burge's words, Gen Z, especially men, are more likely to attend religious services than millennials and even some Gen Xers. But why? Why men and why now? Richard Reeves of the American Institute for Boys and Men gives an answer. Young men are searching for structure, meaning, and purpose. I think it's about finding your place in the world. It's about finding some solid ground to stand on. And then when it comes to politics, I think it was largely assumed that Gen Z, at least in the West, would be one of the most liberal generations, especially given that their parents, mostly Gen Xers, could be characterized as such. But that doesn't seem to have transpired, at least not in the US, where Trump managed to capture at least half of the under-20 vote across nearly all racial and gender groups in the 2024 election. The late conservative influencer Charlie Kirk, who understood how to engage Gen Z with his now famous university campus tours, must take some credit for at the very least forcing Gen Z to think about conservatism as an option. But most importantly, when it comes to attitudes towards the sanctity of life, there is also cause to put hope in Gen Z. An Ipsos poll from June 2025 reveals that young British men are half as likely to support abortion in most cases compared to their elders. 46% of British males aged 16 to 34 say that abortion should be legal in most cases, compared to a significantly higher 71% of the rest of the population. In addition, 28% of men aged 16 to 34 said that abortion should be illegal in most cases, compared with only 6% of men aged 55 to 75. So whilst the results of this poll could hardly be considered a resounding success from a pro-life perspective, what they do reveal in quite a stark manner is that Gen Z men are more likely to be pro-life than their older counterparts in the UK. Who could have predicted this? And it's not just the pollsters cottoning on to pro-life trends in young people. Even Auntie Beeb is too. In November 2024, the BBC aired filmmaker Poppy Jay's documentary, Young, British and Anti-Abortion. In it, Jay documents the activities of various pro-life individuals and groups around the UK, culminating in the 2024 March for Life. The end result is a surprisingly balanced documentary, where Jay, whilst evidently for legal abortion, gives the young pro-lifers the opportunity to share their beliefs and is clearly open to learning from them. In her words, "In this doc, I meet Gen Zers leading the anti-abortion campaign, online, on campuses, and on the streets. They interrogated my views and made me think about the abortion debate in a way that I'd never considered before." And in her concluding remarks in the documentary, Jay gets to the very heart of the point that I'm trying to make here. It's not simply the youth of Gen Z pro-lifers which is grabbing our attention. It's the fact that they're both highly motivated and effective at drawing more people to the cause. Jay says, these activists are young and they are in it for the long term. They know they're not going to change anyone's minds overnight, and their strong social media presence is just giving them more confidence. Yes, they might be a vocal minority, but they're effective at getting their message across. And anecdotally speaking, I see firsthand the enthusiasm of Gen Z pro-lifers. I've even had the privilege of interviewing a couple of them for SPUCTV. Herb Geraghty, an American pro-lifer for starters, is someone who quite literally put their life on the line for unborn babies when protesting at a Washington, D.C. abortion facility, which even led to a jail sentence, before receiving a pardon in early 2025 from President Trump. And then closer to home, I got to speak to Harvey Taylor, who, along with others from Manchester Students for Life, endured a torrent of abuse for daring to hold a society meeting on campus. There's a certain fearlessness about Gen Z pro-lifers, and honestly, it's a joy to witness. So why are Gen Zers more likely to be pro-life than their older counterparts? In my personal opinion, in part it's because of the slow but inevitable death of the mainstream media. Gen Zers are a lot less likely to get their news from the mainstream media, turning instead to alternative news media, with this coming through their phones instead of their TVs. So when it comes to abortion, the mainstream media narrative that abortion is always a fundamental good is not being lapped up by many Gen Zers, in a way that I would argue prior generations have been lapping it up. Instead, they're hearing alternative opinions online and forming their own judgments on the issue. And for those Gen Zers who are brave enough to speak out for the unborn child, SPUC is right there alongside you, ready to help. With new pro-life university societies popping up around the UK, there's a prime opportunity to galvanise a whole generation of students for life. You only need to come to our annual youth conference, which sees over 200 young people taking part, to see just how on fire Gen Z is for the pro-life cause. Now, I recognise that if we want to change the law regarding abortion, we need to change the culture first. And that's precisely what Gen Z pro-lifers are striving to do right now, both in real life and in the digital space. It's the right thing to do, since cultural change will of course come before political change. But they will inevitably face opposition. And the rest of us in the pro-life movement need to be right there, supporting and strengthening them. Happily, the pro-lifers of Gen Z are here to stay. And so are we.